Hi there, welcome back to LokadTV. In the words of Aldous Huxley, we're entering a brave new world, which for many can take some adjusting to. Today on LokadTV, we're going to be discussing the topic of fear and how many can adapt to the new world that they're facing. So Johannes, sounds like a bit of a deep topic this week, so why are we talking about fear?
So specifically in the context of this channel, we are frequently discussing about innovation and especially innovation in supply chain. And supply chain typically has very asymmetrical risks. So if you do something better than what you're currently doing, you're going to have like a few extra % of reward compared to what you were doing previously. So your costs are going to be reduced by a few %. Maybe your margin are going to be increased by a few % if you do it better, which is already a high bar because people are typically, many companies are already quite efficient. But if you screw it up completely, the loss can be gigantic. It can be a significant multiple of what you expect to gain. So the very rational position is to be quite conservative and to be relatively, I would say, to have like a healthy fear of novelty and innovation if it has the potential to just wreak havoc in your supply chain. So that's maybe also an interesting angle, because it's not completely irrational. Is that very good companies are relatively conservative, and that means a certain degree of paranoia and resistance to novelty, because it has the potential to disrupt, wreak havoc, and ultimately undo what you were expecting to gain in the first place through the said innovation.
So it sounds like there's a lot of positives to come out of these changes, but so what is it that people are actually afraid of?
So there are several levels. I mean, first, in certain classes of innovations are basically mechanization in disguise. I mean, or not even in disguise. Autonomous vehicle is like pure mechanization. So obviously, if your job is to be like a truck driver, the idea of having autonomous vehicle do not look good. I mean, the company should not expect you to be looking forward, seeing autonomous vehicles. People will only be very scared because basically they will feel that they will lose their job, and even if they are not immediately fired, it will ultimately mean that a decade down the line, their entire job that they are currently occupy will disappear. And Lokad on its own, with the quantitative supply chain approach, it's not the truck drivers that we are automating. It's basically typically supply chain clerks, the people who are diligently, editing Excel spreadsheets so that everything flows through the supply chain. Fundamentally, if we look forward, those things will be largely automated with, maybe that's a buzzword, with AI, but actually deep learning algorithm, let's say, plus supply chain scientists to orchestrate the whole thing. So the interesting thing is that with truck drivers, it was pretty obvious why they would fear that. So obviously, if you think about should we do or not do autonomous trucks, you would typically not ask the question to the truck driver, because the truck driver is going to say, well, hell no, I don't want that. That's kind of obvious. But if you go to your next level, forecasting technology, who are you going to ask? Well, you are going to ask the white collar people who are doing this job presently. And obviously, if you ask someone who is presently doing statistical forecasts in a relatively, I would say, in a semi-manual way, whether they think they have a positive or negative opinion about an innovation that basically means to do it in a much more highly automated way, then guess what kind of opinion you can expect from them. Obviously, they are going to be very negative about it, and it's exactly the same situation, just like the truck driver versus autonomous vehicle. You cannot be realistically favorable to something that will entirely displace your job position.
Okay, so if we talk about those people, how many people are we talking about here? How much of a company do they make up?
Well, actually, if you think of the people that are present in, let's say, in the company's headquarters, they can potentially make a significant percentage of the world headquarters. Why? Because actually, let's say the vast majority of the people operating in supply chains operate on the ground. That's the truck drivers, the people who operate in the warehouse, in the factory, etc., etc., etc. But those people are not, I would say, close to the decision-making processes of the company that are at the headquarters. And if you look at what the headquarters is going to do, it's going to do the planning, the forecasting, all those support functions for the headquarters. So if you look in terms of number of support white-collar jobs at the headquarter facility that are related to supply chain, they can be relatively numerous, which means that when a company that is operating a large supply chain want to upgrade, they will have a strong, I would say, a strong resistance against that, which can be expected pretty much by design, within their own headquarters with maybe dozens of people that are going to be relatively scared of having this class of innovation entering the company. And then they will use, this asymmetry of risk that I just mentioned, and say, well, they will basically tell everyone, just look at how much risk we are taking doing that. And indeed, the risk is real.
Okay, well, it's not all doom and gloom, is it? I mean, it's a nice sunny day here in Paris, so let's try and be a bit more positive. How can we mitigate this kind of fear? How can we improve upon that?
So the situation is the following. Let's say you are a supply chain director and you want to roll out something that will, over a couple of years, fundamentally mechanize entire classes of jobs, let's say white-collar jobs in your company. The idea is that first, you're not going to fire all those people. I mean, if you're very brutal and that's the management style of the company, maybe, but most companies, let's say in Europe, would probably not proceed that way. What you would do is first, because there are risks involved, you're not going to do like a 100% rollout in 1 month. You're going to do a gradual deployment, and then in your staff you have people. Let's say. You probably have, if your company that is relatively, I would say, old, you probably have about 10% of the people who are living to retirement every year. I mean, that many companies in Europe have this sort of age pyramid. So basically, if you just wait 1 year, you have 10% of the people who retire. Then you have 10% of people who just go, who take on another job, competitors, or just move on somewhere else. So basically, and then you have people who move internally. Again, 10%. Again, 10% a year sounds, it's just once every 10 years, so it's not that much. So here we are talking just by having, 10%, 10%, 10% who retire, 10% who move outside the company, 10% who move inside the company. We are talking of 1/3 of your staff that pretty much, rotates somehow every year. So if you're a large company, and you just do a gradual deployment, you can have a gentle transitions where just people move to other places gradually. You don't have to necessarily to fire everyone. Then if you think into even more positively, the idea of transitioning toward, I would say, machine learning setup, or different class of setup, it also creates new jobs. Maybe not as many as you had before, but it certainly creates more opportunities for people to evaluate to jobs that are typically even more interesting, I would say.
So we're not just kind of appeasing our conscience slightly. I mean, there's surely going to be a bit of a reduction in headcount down to us, right?
Yes, and that has been the essence of the, I would say, industrial progress for the last couple of centuries, actually. A couple of 100 years ago, the #1 job in Paris was actually people carrying buckets of water. And that was a very significant proportion of the population. That was just to ensure the water distribution. I mean, nowadays we have running water, so this job has entirely disappeared, and there is nobody, I think, that truly regrets the idea of having an entire army of people carrying buckets of water around. And the same, I think, in the grand scheme of things, will be said about supply chain when you have like armies of clerks who are spending their days to edit manually or semi-manually gigantic Excel sheets. It doesn't really make much sense to use people who could be doing things that are much smarter, which bring much more added value to the company, to keep those people just doing such incredibly clerical tasks that the machine could do to a large extent. So yes, there will be a reduction of headcount, but like I would say, most things in supply chain, it's if you can do more with less people, chances are that in the end you're just going to do more. You're not going to do it. You're just going to shrink or downsize your company just because you can do it with less people. You're just going to expand to do more, to do a better service. You want to do a better care on what you're doing on the last mile. You know, for e-commerce, you want to have better negotiation with your suppliers so that you can adjust the way your own supply chain operates, so that it's make it easier for your supplier to serve you, so that you can negotiate better prices. And similarly, you can have more people that you can that are available to discuss with your own clients, so that you know how to serve them better for their specific needs. And it takes more people, and that is not as easily, I would say, automatable as, let's say, Excel crunching.
Okay, now let's talk about sort of the implementation of this solution. What can we do to ensure that this transition happens as smoothly as possible?
I mean, first, I think if you're like CEO of a company that operates a large supply chain or supply chain director, you have to identify that, again, people have agenda that goes directly against the improvements that you want to deliver. It does not necessarily mean that they are against the company or extra, that you cannot realistically ask people to go in a direction where they feel extremely insecure.
So have you got an example there? What sort of agenda have you got?
Again, let's imagine you're the head of a demand planning team, and you have like 20 employee under your command. And why do you need 20 people in the first place? Well, you need 20 people because they are doing order planning through Excel. If you present to these managers the fantastic opportunity of upgrading to a software where it will only take like 2 data scientists to do the same job, this manager plus the same job will be done with methods that are much more sophisticated than the methods that are being used presently. So the manager is probably not even the right person to manage those two future data scientists. This person might not be thrilled by this perspective. So don't expect too much support from the existing I would say hierarchy up to fairly high level. I mean, most people do not have a vested interest in improving the overall efficiency of the company, if that means that they will lose, you know, status, or even if the manager himself is in no way being threatened of losing his job, he would maybe lose his own headcount. You know, in large companies, the headcounts that you can manage is a symbol of power. It's, you know, are you a big manager or small manager? Well, it depends on how many people you manage. So again, people are not exactly overjoyed, I would say, even within the management layers, with the idea of doing a lot more with a lot less people, if that means that they are going to lose, you know, their small barony that they had within the company. So probably I would say is to carefully identify the agendas that people will predictably have, and then to offer, you know, a career path for all those people so that they can evolve in the next version of the company. So that means that, for example, planners can move toward, for example, tasks that involve, you know, data quality, data control. Again, if you want to have something that is vastly more automated, then you're much more critically dependent on the quality of the data. So that means that part of the staff that you had to do like the Excel crunching can be used to purpose that add much more added value, I would say, on the data control side. They can even be, some of them can even be used to try getting your hands on more data that is not present in your system yet. And then for the management, that means that they would probably have to move toward different sort of tasks where they refocus more on, you know, what is happening on the supplier side and or the client side or their internal processes, and maybe spend more time on rethinking, you know, the very constraints associated with the supply chain processes of the company, as opposed to spend a lot of time just diligently crunching the numbers in a way that is kind of semi-manual. So again, there can be opportunities for the management to be presented of doing something that is really adding a lot of value for the company, that might, I would say, motivate a manager, even if in the end this manager is probably going to lose a good share of the headcount that this person managed. But if this person succeeds in bringing a lot of added value through the innovation that is being deployed, then basically that opens a career path that is a bit different, but where it can still be relatively valued within the company, both in a way of from a financial perspective, but also in terms of status. You know, are you someone who is doing something that is relatively important and of value for the company? And that can be true even, I would say, in this world where this innovation is being rolled out. Again, it's very rare that you have like a technology like quantitative supply chain that is rolled out without support from the people in the company. It takes a lot of support inside to achieve a success, and some people will ultimately take credit for the success if it succeeds.
Okay, so you spoke about the manager there. What about the people that manager is managing? What sort of tips have you got for them to sort of move on with this implementation? What about their roles?
So, I mean, if you're in the position of, let's say, you've been doing, I mean, worst case, all you've been doing for a decade is like manual Excel sheet editing. So you see, your job has, let's say, as an entry-level planner, you've been having, I would say, you've been stuck with highly clerical tasks. Then my suggestion is to learn more about the type of work, the type of processes that you're modeling through Excel. You see, because there is one thing that is not going away, are the physical reality of your supply chain. So even if the mathematical methods, the calculation method goes away, so basically those Excel sheets are thrown out of the window, and that there is a better class of software to do it instead of doing it semi-manually on an Excel sheet. What is not going to change are the fundamental process at the physical level. I mean, some will partially change, maybe the introduction of let's say autonomous vehicle, autonomous trucks rather than classical trucks. But even that will not fundamentally change the constraints that you need to have a certain network to organize your distribution, that one truck can only be in one place at one time, that a truck has a fixed capacity, that a truck basically costs money by the kilometer. All of those constraints still remain true, even if you have this innovation that is rolled out. So my suggestion would be for those people is focus more on what are not going to change within your supply chains, which are probably the fundamentals. And so that you can acquire, I would say, a bit of expert knowledge, so that once this innovation gets deployed, maybe like, and we're talking here of like software innovation, you will still have, cards in your hand, and many people will still see you as valuable, just because, well, you know how many of those things operate. And so if people will start to think of how can we improve those processes, or how can we have people that help us to measure the improvement, it's not only about improving, sometimes it's also about having the correct KPIs, then they will come to you, not because you have Excel skills, because those skills are not very valuable, but just because you're fundamentally very familiar with the way the company operates and the way the supply chain operates, and all the constraints that are still true even when you rolled out your software innovation.
Okay, and as a final sort of point, how about those top-level executives? What sort of final tip would you give to them?
I mean, the final tip for those, I would say, software executive is pay close attention to probably what Amazon is doing. Amazon is very aggressively gaining market shares on tons of markets. They have been banking on super highly automated supply chains for over a decade, and they are becoming exceedingly good at it. And so I would say for most supply chain, if you do not start to pay attention to what I would say advanced statistical software can deliver to your supply chain, well, you have competitors who are paying attention already. So so in the end, it will be really about, do you want to be completely disrupted, or do you want to start doing the transition now, so that, because Amazon cannot frontally assault all verticals, so they are only, they are moving on tons of verticals already. So it gives time, I mean, because they cannot, capture every single market overnight. It will take them a decade or more. So that means that you still have time, but you should be starting to use this time now and not wait a decade until Amazon, or let's say Alibaba from China, or some kind of next generation e-commerce like let's say Zalando in Europe have gained so much skills at being better at supply chain that basically you cannot even recover the time that is lost waiting, keeping all your process, I would say, immutable, while you had plenty of time to do a very gradual transition.
Okay, well, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap things up there, but it turns out the only thing to fear is fear itself.
Yes.
Cool, so that's everything for this week. We'll be back again next week with another episode, but until then, we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.